The US President Joe Biden is saying he is determined to restore aid to Ukraine a day after funding was dropped from a temporary spending bill to avert a government shutdown. The deal came just hours before the shutdown was due to take effect and required House Republican leaders to remove a measure to send $6 billion in military assistance to Ukraine after opposition from Republican Party hardliners. Both Republican and Democratic Senate leaders have promised to try again to soon approve the additional funding. Speaking to reporters, Mr. Biden vowed the US would not abandon Ukraine, urging Republicans in Congress to pass the Ukraine military assistance.
There's no Ukraine funding in this agreement. Despite that, I did not believe we could let millions of Americans go through the pain of a government shutdown. But let's be clear. I hope my friends on the other side keep their word about support for Ukraine. They said they're going to support Ukraine in a separate vote. We cannot, under any circumstance, allow American support for Ukraine to be interrupted. I fully expect the Speaker to keep his commitment to secure the passage and support needed to help Ukraine as they defend themselves against aggression and brutality.
Well, if some Republicans have their way, Mr. Biden will soon be dealing with a new Speaker of the House. Florida Representative Matt Gaetz announced he would trigger votes this week to remove Speaker Kevin McCarthy from his leadership role. Mr. McCarthy made a series of concessions to gain support from hardline Republicans to become House Speaker after a historic 14 rounds of votes in January. Mr. Gaetz says he's in breach of his agreement.
He made that commitment, he broke it, and if at this time, next week, Kevin McCarthy is still Speaker of the House, it will be because the Democrats bailed him out, and he can be their Speaker, not mine.
You don't have the votes to remove him. So...
Well, by the way, I don't know until we have him. And by the way, I might not have him the first time, but I might have him before the 15th ballot. That's the number of ballots Kevin McCarthy needs.
So are you going to do this every day like you had suggested? Or are you going to go through this process of voting over and over and over again?
I am relentless.
He says he's relentless. So what does Mr. McCarthy think about all of this? Well, he went on television as well on Sunday to say he's not going anywhere.
He says he's coming for you. Can you survive?
Yes, I'll survive. You know, this is personal with Matt. Matt voted against the most conservative ability to protect our border, secure our border. He's more interested in securing TV interviews than doing something. He wanted to push us into a shutdown, even threatening his own district with all the military people there who would not be paid, only because he wants to take this motion. So be it. Bring it on. Let's get over with it, and let's start governing.
So what will happen next? How will these differences be resolved? I asked Laura Blessing, who's Senior Fellow at Georgetown University Government Affairs Institute.
Matt Gaetz is signaling a difference in opinion over, spending priorities, over levels of spending, over a desire to push the speakership of McCarthy further to the right. Promises that are just extraordinarily difficult to keep, even though McCarthy appears to keep trying to a very generous extent, I think is fair to say. That being said, Representative Gaetz, whether or not he has the votes to remove him as Speaker, to pass the motion to vacate, whether there's even a successor, that he would want to appoint as Speaker of the House. This isn't something that is, you have to have a Speaker of the House.
Well, we remember it well.
There's no one floated as an alternative that can get enough votes. So at this point, it's highly theoretical, even though he promises to put it on the floor.
Yeah, I mean, we do remember it well, the period of time where there was no Speaker and they couldn't get it through. They couldn't get this agreed in Congress to have this Speaker in place. But Kevin McCarthy sounds equally determined as well. I mean, this is stalling, isn't it? A proper result when it comes to agreement on the spending on the part of this present government.
Sure. Well, we're funding the government up in, for 45 days. So we do have stopgap spending. As you mentioned earlier, there are some important items that we still need to get to, particularly aid for Ukraine. But, it's entirely possible for, the House to get distracted by other items, including volatility regarding the speakership.
How do you think this will sort of play out? As you say, we've got 45 days, so we'll see what happens in that short-term period. But in terms of how this is perceived by the American public, because of course there's an election next year, and are people getting tired of this?
No, I do think that there is some level of fatigue for this sort of unnecessary brinksmanship. To be sure, I want to take the win. I'm glad that we didn't shut down, but it was pretty unnecessary to come down to the wire on this one. In terms of who might pay a price for different shutdowns in the past, we have kind of modest evidence to suggest that that if the House behaving badly might pay a little bit of a price, but that hasn't been a large swing that has really been determinative in elections.
Laura Blessing there with her take on what's going on in Congress currently.